Hi, everybody. This is Aaron Mesh with Willamette Week. This is our Distant Voices series. And today I'm speaking with Dan Mensher from Seattle, Washington. Dan, am I getting your pronunciation of your name right?
Yep, you sure are.
Dan's with the Keller Rohrbach law firm up in Seattle. And the law firm is one of three law firms that filed suit against PacifiCorp in Multnomah County Circuit Court in a class action lawsuit this past week. The lawsuit looks at some of the fires, particularly the Beachy Creek fire, if I understand correctly, that really carved a path of destruction through the Santiam Valley and beautiful parts of Oregon. As Willamette Week first reported 2 weeks ago, the incident command reports that looked at those fires showed that at least 13 of the contributing fires to the Beachy Creek fire were set by downed power lines, which is how we find ourselves in the setting where legal liability starts to become a question out of this tragedy. Dan, what did you see in those incident command reports that made you think, well, this isn't just an awful natural disaster, but this is something that could have been prevented?
Right, Aaron, I think you're pointing to the incident command reports as a real critical part of our team's evolution and how it began thinking about the issue. I think, like most of us who live in the West, we saw the pictures of people's homes being destroyed, of fires ripping through communities, et cetera. And obviously our first instinct was to be horrified, and our hearts obviously broke for the people who lost their lives, lost their homes, lost their communities, et cetera. But as we began to read more, the incident command report, et cetera, reporting in publications like the Willamette Week, we realized that this wasn't really just the result of tragedy or an accident, really. Right? We know there are forest fires. Forest fires are part and parcel of our ecology, of our state. Right? Our forests are sort of born of fires. But what really set our thinking about this apart was that with reporting about that these were the power lines ignitions. And the problem with power line ignitions, as we've learned from situations in California and in Oregon, is that those power lines, when a power line is causing the ignitions, a couple of things are unique. They happen in rapid succession often, right? I usually think of a normal wildland fire, kind of like the Bambi fire, right? Where it's marching through the forest. And you sort of know, okay, it's moving in this way. We can let folks know, look, you might need to evacuate. But a lot of folks in the Santiam Canyon, for them, what was the Beachy Creek fire, right, was sort of a more typical wildland fire, as we understand it, was marching along, and folks knew, okay, it's 20 miles away, it's a couple ridges away, we've got time. And then all of a sudden, many of them realized, really in a very small span of time, all of a sudden there are new fires that are springing up all over the place in our communities. And those fires are being sparked by power lines. And not only is that problematic, because now you've got many ignition points, making it really difficult for any sort of fire response to coordinate to prevent the damage, but it's happening right there in town. So that often these power lines aren't even catching the trees on fire, they're catching shrubs and grasses, on fire. That allows them to race in toward buildings, and the buildings themselves act as fuel and burn down. So, again, when we started reading those stories, we thought, well, surely we have figured out how to operate our electrical grid more effectively and responsibly, right? This is not the first time that electrical equipment has lit fires that are devastating to communities, right? PG&E dealt with this in California 3 or 4 years ago, right? The Governor Brown has put together a task force to deal with this very issue. And in that task force report, recognized that fires started by power lines are 10 times more damaging, more powerful, and difficult to control than sort of what we think of as natural or normal wildfires.
I realize this is probably a question that involves some speculation, but how large do you think the class is?
That's a great question. I don't have the data at my fingertips to know exactly how many people are involved. And we have pretty good fire maps in terms of what burned. We have a pretty good idea of where those fires were that were started by power lines, and the actual overlaying of how many people are in that area, how many people lost their homes and their property. That is something that we are working on, and will be, as we develop the facts over the next month, coming weeks, et cetera, we'll get a better idea of that as we go.
This is a bleak thought, but it just occurred to me that maybe some of the people who are going to be in your class are kind of lucky in that if they turn out to live in an area of the map where power lines caused the fire that tore down their home, as opposed to somebody who lived 5 miles elsewhere that lives in an area where a lightning caused a fire that tore down their home.
You know,
it's a very 2020 kind of thought, right?
Right. That is a 2020 kind of a thought. That's probably right. I don't think anybody is lucky who had their homes destroyed or their property damaged or lost their lives, obviously, from the fires. And so, but look, again, as I said, no one's saying that fires never are supposed to happen in the forest, right? Forests have fire. It's just how it goes. The real question is, who is responsible? When there's a company where we have a fire that was not inevitable, that's really the issue. When a particular fires are not inevitable, right? It's because someone did something that they weren't supposed to do, or somebody didn't do something that they should have done. That's where we start to say, you know what, these people wouldn't have lost this but for this. So now it's time to make sure that the folks who've caused that damage, that harm, that they really need to make sure that they're putting those folks back where they were before.
Doesn't that like inevitability question fall into some shades of gray? There's already a raging argument in the state of Oregon about forest management, about climate change, about who's responsible for the underlying factors that are causing these mega blazes across the West. In some sense, none of these fires are inevitable.
Well, I guess I would disagree a little bit. Look, since the ice sheet retreated from Oregon, fires have been part of the forests. I mean, it sounds maybe hokey or a little silly, but it is true, right? Up from California through Washington and BC, we have certain trees like the lodgepole pine that require forest fires. They require fires to regenerate, right? They have serotinous, I believe is how you pronounce it, pine cones, right? So that literally they have to melt open. Otherwise, they are sealed shut until a fire comes along and they open, and that's what allows them to regenerate. So yeah, fire happens, right? Fire happens, but these are different, right? These events are different from those sort of typical wildland fires that are inevitable. Many of the fires that happened that burned down people's houses weren't really even what we would think of as a true forest fire, right? The Gates School District, where the old Gates School District, where the incident command was situated, if you look around that area, there are green trees in that area. What burned? Well, the power line came down on the cyclone fence, as we've heard, lit grasses and shrubs on fire, and that's what starts the conflagration. It burns into the built area, and the houses themselves then burn down, et cetera. But that's not inevitable. That is not inevitable at all. That's not part of the sort of the normal fire ecology and the fire cycles that are here. So look, it's true. Some fires will just start regardless. Fine. That's terrific. That's actually great for our forest health, right? I think. But it's these types of really special fires that are so particularly damaging to people and property in those areas.
The image that's sticking in my head is that you're describing, in some cases, fires that occurred where the forest didn't burn.
That's right. That is right. I think it goes
against everything that people think about these, right? Like,
that's right.
Common perception is, well, you just can't get out of the way. Oregon's forests are burning in these massive fires. We have too much timber that's never been managed, and then you're just stuck. You're talking about places in which the timber's fine.
That's right. That's right. I think that's exactly right. I've seen actually some photographs from aerial photographs in the last few days, where you see in some areas, really in the wildland areas, you do see sort of a huge swath of burned, acres, hundreds of acres of burned forests, right? But then you start to see these large swaths of green forests and patches of burns, where homes and businesses and schools and other buildings have been destroyed. But clearly it's not because some fire marched in, as you say, sort of in this inevitable march inward. No, it's happening in these small pockets where we're having multiple points of ignition all at the same time, all from power lines that are arcing, or sometimes it's transformers that melt down or blow up because they're being overloaded, et cetera. And all of those fires are concentrated. Not only does it make it really difficult if you're going to try to manage the fire, you've got dozens and dozens of fires springing up all of a sudden. So look, all of our wildland fire crews are doing heroic efforts out there, and suddenly behind, they're out managing forest fire coming toward us, and then but suddenly we've got fires starting behind them, dozens and dozens of them.